The alien woman thought humans were cruel until I shared my last meal. Max had never imagined that his life would come to this. His ship, once a symbol of human ingenuity, now lay in ruins, shattered across an alien world. He had been on a routine mission, just another day exploring uncharted space, when the engine failure had sent him crashing into the heart of a foreign planet. Stranded, with no communication and no idea where he was, Max had to rely on his training to survive. The world around him was harsh, alien, wild, and completely untamed. Strange, towering plants with luminescent leaves brushed against him as he trekked through the dense jungle. The air was thick with the scent of unfamiliar flowers, and every step seemed to echo a sense of isolation. He knew that the longer he stayed in this unknown land, the more perilous his situation would become. But survival was in his blood. Max wasn't about to give up. He had no food left, and only the water collected from the rainstorms that swept across the planet. He could feel his energy draining with each passing hour, but he pressed on. Every instinct told him to keep moving, to find shelter before nightfall, or he might not survive the harsh creatures that roamed the planet after dark. As he pushed through a thicket of foliage, something caught his eye, a flash of movement, a glimmer of color that stood out against the vibrant green backdrop. Max froze, instinctively reaching for the knife on his belt. His eyes darted across the landscape, searching for the source of the disturbance. Then he saw her. She was crouched behind a rock formation, barely visible in the dense underbrush. Her skin was a deep shade of violet, her eyes wide and watching him with suspicion. Her body was lean but muscular, as if she had endured the trials of survival herself. She appeared to be injured. Her arm was wrapped in what seemed to be a makeshift bandage, soaked with dark fluid. Her breathing was shallow and she looked as though she had been through a battle of her own. Max didn't make a move at first. He knew the first rule of surviving an alien planet: always be cautious. He had no idea who or what this being was. Was she a threat, an enemy, or perhaps a fellow survivor stranded just like him? "Hello," Max called out softly, keeping his voice calm and non-threatening. He didn't want to scare her, not when he was so alone in this strange place. The woman flinched but didn't flee. She remained hidden behind the rocks, her eyes still fixed on him. Max took a step closer, careful not to startle her. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentler now. "I don't want to hurt you." The woman's eyes narrowed, and Max saw her muscles tense as though she were preparing to attack. He raised his hands in surrender, showing he meant no harm. "I'm stranded here," he continued, slowly lowering his hands. "I'm just trying to survive." The woman didn't respond immediately. Instead, she examined him, her gaze flickering over him in a way that made him feel like she was trying to assess his worth, or his threat level. "You are human," she said finally, her voice deep and smooth but with an edge of hostility. Max's brow furrowed. "Yeah, that's right, you're not human." "No," the woman replied, "I am Thalirian." Max had never heard of the Thalirians. Were they native to this planet? Were they friendly? "What's your name?" he asked, hoping to open up a conversation. "Turna," she answered after a moment, her voice still cautious. "And you are the first human I have seen in years." Max took a deep breath. "Well, Turna, I'm Max, and I don't mean any harm." For a long time there was only silence between them. Max didn't know how to break the tension. Here, on this strange world, surrounded by unfamiliar creatures, meeting another being, especially one from a race he had never heard of, felt surreal. Still, he knew this encounter could be either a blessing or a curse. He had to tread carefully. Turna looked down at her injured arm, then back up at Max. "You should leave," she said, her voice sharp now. "Humans are cruel, you should not be here." Max stiffened. He had heard many things about alien species from his training, but the idea that they thought humans were cruel was new to him. "I'm not like that," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm just trying to get back home. I don't want to hurt anyone." Turna's expression softened, but just slightly. You say that now, but humans have brought nothing but pain to my people. The violence, the destruction. It is all you are known for. Max's stomach tightened at her words. It wasn't the first time he had heard such accusations, but hearing it from someone like Turna, someone who was right here, right in front of him, made it feel real. I'm not all humans, Max replied quietly. I don't know how to prove it to you, but I'm not your enemy. Turna studied him for a long time, and for a moment Max thought she might turn away. But then she spoke again. Perhaps, but you are here and your kind's cruelty is something I cannot forget. Max nodded slowly. He could see the pain in her eyes, the weight of her past. Whatever had happened to her people, was something that no words could erase. He understood that. He didn't want to be judged for the mistakes of his species, but he also knew that he couldn't change the way she saw humans. Not yet, anyway. So what now? Max asked after a pause. You just want me to leave? Turna didn't answer right away. She seemed to consider him, her gaze flickering to the wreckage of his ship in the distance. After a long silence, she spoke again, this time with a touch of uncertainty in her voice. You can stay for now, but only until you get the supplies you need to leave. I will not let you linger here, not for long. This place is not safe for humans. Max didn't argue. He had no idea what dangers lurked on this planet, but it didn't take long to realize that he didn't have much of a choice. Turna was right, he had to survive. Thanks, he said softly. I'll take whatever help you can offer. Turna eyed him warily but nodded. Don't thank me yet. As Max followed her into the dense underbrush, the weight of their situation settled in. He had no idea where he was, what dangers were out there, or if he could trust Turna, but he had to survive. And if working with this Thalirian woman was the way to do it, he would take the chance. Though he had no food left and very little hope, something about this encounter, the very fact that they were standing together, felt like it might be the beginning of something more than just survival. Perhaps it was the beginning of understanding. The next morning, Max awoke to the sound of soft rustling outside his makeshift shelter. The cave, which he had taken refuge in the night before, was cool, and the damp air clung to his skin. He shifted his weight, feeling the soreness from sleeping on uneven ground, and rubbed his eyes to clear the lingering grogginess. His first instinct was to grab his knife, but then he remembered the presence of Turna. He had spent the night with her, though neither of them had spoken much after their tense encounter the previous evening. She had chosen a spot at the far side of the cave, her violet skin barely visible in the shadows. Her breathing had steadied, but she still seemed distant, wary of him, even though he had tried to prove his non-hostile intentions. She had shared nothing about herself, and Max hadn't pressed for more information. The reality of survival had been enough to focus both their minds. Now, as the sun filtered through the cracks in the cave entrance, Max wondered if Turna would still consider him a threat. The night had been quiet, but the air seemed thick with unsaid words. He could still feel the sting of her accusations from yesterday, that all humans were cruel. He wanted to change her mind, but he had no idea how. The last thing he needed was to be abandoned by her in this unknown world. Max cautiously crawled out of the cave, keeping an eye on the foliage surrounding him. The jungle was alive with sound, chirps, and calls from creatures he couldn't identify, the distant hum of an alien wind rustling through the trees. He didn't know what Turna's plan was for him, but he hoped she had some sort of idea of how to survive here. A few moments later, Turna appeared from the shadows of the jungle, her arms still wrapped in the bandages from the previous night. She hadn't spoken to him yet, and Max didn't know whether that was a sign that she had decided he wasn't worth her time or if she was simply trying to avoid him. Either way, she moved with a fluid grace, like she was in her element, at ease in this wild place. "Morning," Max said, offering a tentative smile. Turna glanced at him but didn't respond immediately. She crouched down, inspecting the ground as if she were looking for something. Max took a deep breath, deciding not to push for a response. He wasn't sure how to talk to her, especially with the weight of their previous conversation still hanging between them. "I hope we can work together," Max said quietly. "I know things aren't exactly friendly between us, but we need to get out of here." Turna straightened up and met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "I told you," she said, her voice flat. "You can stay, but not forever, and I don't trust you." Max nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He had no right to ask for her trust, not after what she had been through, but he couldn't let her brush him off just yet. "I'm not asking you to trust me," he said. "I'm just asking for a chance to prove that I'm not like the others." Turna's violet eyes softened for a moment, but she didn't respond. She turned and began walking toward the dense foliage, signaling for Max to follow. With a resigned sigh, Max grabbed his pack and followed her. As they moved deeper into the jungle, the landscape became more treacherous. The trees here were even taller than before, their trunks twisting in strange, almost unnatural shapes. Vines hung from above, and large, colorful flowers bloomed on the forest floor, emitting a sweet, almost intoxicating scent. Max couldn't help but be in awe of the beauty of the place, even though he knew it was dangerous. "Where are we going?" Max asked as they trekked onward, trying to make conversation. "To the river," Turna replied without looking back. "We need water, and I know where it flows." Max was impressed. She had a knowledge of this world that he couldn't even begin to understand. It was clear that she had lived here for some time, and perhaps she had even been abandoned in this jungle, forced to survive on her own. He wondered what had happened to her people. What had caused them to turn against her, and why had she been left behind? They walked in silence for a while, with only the sounds of the jungle to keep them company. Max did his best to keep pace with Turna, though he struggled to match her speed. She was clearly more at home here than he was. After a couple of hours, they arrived at the river, its water flowing swiftly through the rocks, sparkling in the light of the sun. Turna crouched by the edge of the water, dipping her hands in to drink. Max followed suit, taking a long, much-needed drink from the cool water. "This is good," Max said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Thanks for showing me this." Turna didn't acknowledge his gratitude. Instead, she stood up and began looking around, scanning the area. Max followed her gaze, trying to figure out what she was looking for. "Where are we going now?" he asked again. Turna's sharp eyes narrowed as she spotted something in the distance. She made a low, almost imperceptible sound and began walking toward it. Max had no choice but to follow. After a few more minutes of walking, they arrived at a large cluster of trees, their trunks twisted together in a spiral. In the center of the trees was a hollowed-out space, and on the ground lay the remnants of what appeared to be a fire pit. Charred wood was scattered about, and the smell of burnt ash hung in the air. "This is where I stay," Turna said, gesturing toward the small area. Max looked around, noting the small shelter she had fashioned from the branches and leaves of the surrounding trees. It wasn't much, but it seemed enough to protect her from the elements. "You live here?" Max asked, glancing around. "Alone?" Turna nodded, her expression hardening. "I've been here for years." Max didn't know what to say to that. Years. It was hard for him to imagine living in a place like this for that long. He had only been here for a short time, and already he felt the weight of loneliness pressing on him. He couldn't even begin to imagine what it would have been like for Turna, abandoned by her people, forced to survive in this jungle. Turna turned and looked at him, her eyes narrowing. "I've seen your kind before," she said. "Humans, cruel and selfish. You destroy everything in your path and you leave nothing but pain behind." Max's heart sank. "I'm not like that," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I'm just trying to survive. I didn't ask for any of this." "I know," Turna said softly. "But it doesn't change what humans have done. You've caused the death of my people." Max swallowed hard, the weight of her words hitting him like a punch to the stomach. He had heard of conflicts between humans and other species, but he never realized how deeply they ran. He didn't know the full story, but Turna's pain was evident. "I'm sorry," Max said quietly. "I don't know what happened, but I'm not like the others." Turna studied him for a moment, as if deciding whether or not to believe him. Finally, she spoke again. "I'll let you stay here for now," she said. "But don't think that means I trust you." Max nodded, knowing that her trust was something he would have to earn and that it wouldn't come easily, but he was determined to try. He couldn't change the past, but maybe, just maybe, he could change how she saw him, and how she saw humanity. As the sun began to set behind the trees, casting long shadows across the forest floor, Max and Turna sat together in silence. The air grew colder, and the sounds of the jungle shifted with the coming night. The world around them felt so different from Earth, so alien. Yet in the quiet moments between them, there was a sense that they weren't so different after all. They were both survivors. Days passed, and Max slowly started adjusting to the rhythm of life on the alien world. He had become used to the strange, ever-present hum of the jungle, the shifting colors of the sky as the planet's twin moons rose and set. Turna, despite her cold demeanor, had allowed him to stay with her in her shelter. She said little, but her actions spoke volumes. She showed him how to gather food from the forest, bitter fruits that grew in clusters near the river, edible roots that grew beneath the thick, moss-covered rocks, and small creatures that scurried along the forest floor. Max had never been one for survival training back on Earth, but here, he was learning quickly. He had no choice. He was dependent on the knowledge of someone who had been living in this hostile environment for years. Turna was an expert at blending into the jungle. She could move through the undergrowth with the silence of a shadow, her eyes constantly scanning for any sign of danger. It was clear that she had seen things, terrible things that Max couldn't even imagine. Despite his growing skills, the situation still felt fragile. Turna had yet to fully trust him. There were moments, though, when she let her guard down just enough to show him a glimpse of who she really was. Like when they would sit by the fire at night, the flames flickering between them. Max would try to start a conversation, asking her about her past, about her people, but she would always deflect, turning the conversation back to survival. He respected her boundaries, though. He knew that she wasn't ready to talk about the things that haunted her. One evening, as they sat in the quiet of their shelter, Max finally decided to push a little further. "Why did they leave you?" he asked softly, his voice almost lost in the crackle of the fire. Turna didn't answer right away. She continued poking the fire, her face lit by the flickering light. Her violet skin seemed to glow in the warmth of the flames. "They thought I was weak," she said after a long pause, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was part of the faction that wanted peace, but my people, they don't believe in peace anymore. They believe in strength, in domination. When I refused to take part in their violence, they turned on me." Max listened in silence, feeling a pang of sympathy for her. He couldn't even begin to understand what it must have been like for her, being cast out, left to die in a world that was as dangerous as it was beautiful. "Do you ever want to go back?" Max asked carefully, testing the waters. "I mean to your people." Turna's head snapped up, her eyes flashing with something between anger and sorrow. "No," she said sharply, "I would never go back. They are not my people anymore." Max didn't say anything. He could see the pain in her eyes, the depth of her hurt. He had no idea what had really happened, but he understood enough to know that she had been betrayed in a way that left scars far deeper than any physical wound. After a moment of silence, Turna stood up abruptly. "We need to gather more food." "Come," she said, not waiting for a response before heading toward the jungle. Max stood, grabbing his pack, and followed her, his mind still processing what she had said. As they walked through the dense forest, the world around them seemed to come alive. The jungle had a way of making everything feel more intense, every color brighter, every sound sharper. The air was thick with the scent of flowers and damp earth. Max had to keep his wits about him. He knew that at any moment something could jump out of the undergrowth, something he wasn't prepared for. But Turna, as always, was calm and composed, moving with purpose as she guided him deeper into the wilderness. They stopped near a large tree, its bark twisting into strange patterns. Turna crouched down and began to dig beneath a patch of moss, her movements swift and practiced. After a few moments, she pulled up a bundle of roots, holding them out to Max. "Eat these," she said. "They will keep you strong." Max took the roots, eyeing them with some suspicion. They looked strange, but he trusted Turna's knowledge. He bit into one, and the taste was bitter, far from what he was used to. But it was food, and it was enough. "You've been doing this for years?" Max asked as he chewed slowly. "Surviving here all alone?" Turna didn't look at him as she continued digging for more food. "Yes." Max shook his head in awe. "I don't know how you do it. I can barely keep up." Turna glanced at him for a moment, a flicker of something passing in her eyes, perhaps amusement, perhaps something else. But she said nothing. She continued her task, and Max took it as his cue to stop asking questions. As the day wore on, they gathered more food, but something was different this time. Turna seemed more focused, her movements sharper. Max followed her, trying to stay out of her way, though he could sense that she was on edge. Her ears twitched at every sound, and her eyes constantly darted around them, as if she were anticipating something. It wasn't until they reached a narrow part of the jungle, where the trees seemed to close in around them, that Max understood why. A sound like the rustling of leaves came from somewhere in the distance. Then another, louder this time, followed by a growl. It was low, deep, and animalistic. Max felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He instinctively reached for his knife, but Turna held up a hand to stop him. "Stay close," she said, her voice low, dangerous. "We have to be quick." Before Max could respond, a massive shape darted out of the trees, a blur of claws and teeth. It was a creature, unlike anything Max had ever seen. It was large, covered in dark, matted fur, with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce the darkness of the jungle. It snarled as it lunged at them, its claws extending toward Turna. Without thinking, Turna moved in a flash, her body twisting and turning with a fluid grace. She ducked beneath the creature's swipe and drove her knife into its side. The creature howled in pain, but Turna didn't hesitate. She twisted the blade, pulling it free as the creature staggered back. Max stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never seen anything like it. The creature was massive, its sheer size intimidating. But Turna, she was fearless. She wasn't backing down. The creature lunged again, but this time it was too slow. Turna darted to the side, avoiding its deadly claws, and with one swift motion, she plunged the knife deep into its throat. The creature gasped, a final roar escaping its mouth before it collapsed to the ground, lifeless. Turna stood over it, breathing heavily, her chest rising and falling with the effort. Max couldn't help but stare. The woman he had met days ago, the one who had seemed so distant, so cold, was a warrior. She had killed the creature with precision, without hesitation. She turned to Max, wiping the blood from her hands. "Stay alert," she said. "There are more of them out here." Max nodded, still in shock from what he had just witnessed. His respect for her had grown 100-fold in that moment. She wasn't just a survivor, she was a fighter, and she had just saved his life. "I don't know what to say," Max said, his voice hoarse. Turna glanced at him but said nothing. Instead, she knelt down beside the creature, inspecting it for anything useful. She pulled a small pouch from its side, tying it to her belt before standing and gesturing for Max to follow. As they walked back through the jungle, Max couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. He had been useless in that moment, frozen with fear, while Turna had taken charge without a second thought. It was clear now that her survival skills weren't just about knowledge of the land. They were about strength, grit, and something far more complex. Turna's past had shaped her into something different, something stronger. And as Max followed her, still processing the events, he began to realize that his journey on this alien world was about more than just surviving. It was about understanding a woman who had seen too much, who had been through too much, and who was fighting every day to stay alive. He was starting to see her for who she truly was, not just a survivor, but someone who had lost everything, yet still fought to keep going. Max's days in the jungle with Turna blurred together, each one marked by a series of small victories and constant challenges. The forest had become a part of his life, its strange, vivid colors and unrelenting sounds now something he had come to recognize. The towering trees, the hidden dangers, the creatures that roamed the underbrush. He was no longer an outsider. But there was still much he had yet to understand. Turna, on the other hand, remained an enigma. She was a woman of few words, her actions speaking louder than anything she could say. Despite their shared struggle for survival, she kept her distance, emotionally and physically. Max had tried, time and time again, to break through her wall, to understand her past, to learn what had made her so wary of him. But she remained closed off. It was on the seventh day of their uneasy partnership that the events would take a turn neither of them had expected. Max had woken up early, as usual, to the sound of the jungle coming alive. The soft hum of alien insects, the call of distant creatures, and the rustling of leaves were familiar now. Turna was already gone, having left before dawn to scout for food. She had been doing this more and more lately, disappearing into the wilderness for hours without saying a word. Max didn't question her. He had learned long ago that Turna had her own way of doing things, and it was better not to ask too many questions. But today, something felt different. As Max prepared to gather some food for himself, his thoughts wandered to the conversation they'd had the previous evening. Turna had let something slip, a single word that gave him a glimpse into her past. It was the first time she had ever mentioned anything personal, and though she hadn't elaborated, it had stuck with him. She had spoken of her people again, calling them the Thalirians. The word echoed in his mind. He had learned little about the Thalirians in his time with her, and he had never pressed her about it. But now, as the morning sun crept higher in the sky, he realized that there was more to her story, more to the woman he was learning to trust, than he could have imagined. Max grabbed his pack and headed toward the river. He had grown accustomed to the daily routine: gather food, find shelter, and avoid the dangers lurking in the shadows of the jungle. The routine had kept him alive, and it had kept him grounded. But as he moved through the dense undergrowth, the feeling that something was off grew stronger. When he reached the river, he found no sign of Turna. He didn't think much of it at first. She had been gone for longer stretches before. But then, as he made his way to the water's edge, he noticed something unusual: footprints in the mud. Large, deep marks that weren't there the day before. The prints were too fresh, too deliberate. Max's heart began to race. He crouched down, examining the tracks. They were unmistakable. Turna's footprints were mixed with another set, one that was larger and more aggressive-looking. Max knew immediately that this wasn't an accidental encounter. Turna had been followed. His mind raced. He had to find her. He couldn't let anything happen to her, not after everything they'd been through together. He followed the tracks through the jungle, each step more urgent than the last. The deeper he went, the more he felt the pressure of the unknown. The trees closed in around him, the foliage growing thicker and denser. Max kept his eyes peeled, his ears straining for any sound, any clue that could lead him to her. The jungle, once so familiar, now felt foreign and threatening. After what seemed like an eternity, he found her. Turna was standing at the edge of a clearing, her back to him. She was facing a group of Thalirians, at least 6 of them. They were tall, their bodies adorned with glowing markings, their eyes burning with an intensity that was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Max had never seen them before, but he didn't need to be told who they were. The Thalirians were real, and they had found Turna. "Stay back," Max whispered to himself, his hand instinctively going to the knife at his side. His pulse quickened. The situation felt like a powder keg. One small move could set it all off. Turna didn't seem surprised by their presence. She stood tall, her posture unwavering, but there was a noticeable tension in her body. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The air between her and the Thalirians was thick with old wounds, unspoken anger and regret. "Why are you here?" One of the Thalirians, a man with dark blue skin and a jagged scar across his face, asked. His voice was deep and commanding. Max could feel the weight of it in his chest. "I told you," Turna replied coldly. "I no longer serve you." The Thalirian man's eyes narrowed. "You think you can live out here away from your people without consequence? You are a traitor. You are an embarrassment to us all." Max stayed hidden, watching the exchange. His heart was pounding in his ears. He didn't know how to intervene or if he should. Turna had made it clear that she didn't want help, but this was different. These were her people, her past, and they were coming for her. Another Thalirian woman, tall and lithe, stepped forward. Her gaze flicked toward Max, who was still concealed by the thick foliage. She must have sensed something, or perhaps it was just instinct, but her eyes were sharp, calculating. She stepped closer to Turna, her expression unreadable. "You were a fool to think you could hide here," the woman said, her voice softer than the man's but still filled with an underlying venom. "You have abandoned us. We will not allow you to forget your place." Max felt a surge of anger. He couldn't stand by and listen to this. But as much as he wanted to jump in, he knew he had to remain silent. Turna needed to handle this herself. She had already made up her mind. "I am not your soldier anymore," Turna said, her voice unwavering. "I am no longer bound by your laws. I will never return to your war." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. The Thalirians were silent for a moment, as if processing her words. Then, without warning, the scarred man lunged forward, his arm raised as though to strike her. Max moved in an instant, his body acting on instinct. He didn't think about the consequences. He didn't think about anything but Turna's safety. He rushed forward, grabbing a large branch from the ground and swinging it at the Thalirian's head. The impact was brutal. The man staggered back, clutching his head as Max swung again, this time connecting with his chest. The Thalirians gasped in shock, clearly not expecting a human to act with such ferocity. Turna turned, her violet eyes wide with surprise, but she didn't hesitate. She drew her knife and moved toward the others with a deadly grace. Max fought alongside her, his heart pounding with adrenaline as he tried to hold his own. The Thalirians were stronger than him, faster, but his desperation gave him the edge. He had to protect Turna. He couldn't let them take her. The battle was swift but intense. In a blur of motion, Max found himself face to face with one of the Thalirians. The creature's glowing eyes locked onto his, and Max could see the hesitation in its movements. It wasn't used to fighting a human. Max didn't give it a chance to think. He swung the branch again, knocking the Thalirian to the ground. He turned to find Turna finishing off the last of them. Her movements were clean, precise, like she had done this 1,000 times before. When the fight was over, the jungle fell silent again, the sounds of the creatures that lived there returning to their steady rhythm. Max and Turna stood in the clearing, panting from the exertion. Turna wiped the blood from her blade, her face unreadable. "You shouldn't have done that," she said quietly. Max didn't answer right away. He was still trying to catch his breath, still processing what had just happened. "I couldn't just let them hurt you." Turna glanced at him, her expression softening slightly. "You risked your life for me." Max gave her a small, tight smile. "I couldn't leave you." For a moment there was silence between them, but this time it was different. There was understanding in it, an unspoken bond formed through the fire of conflict. Turna didn't speak again. She simply walked over to the bodies of the fallen Thalirians, inspecting them one last time before she turned and began to leave the clearing. Max followed her, the weight of their shared battle heavy in the air. He had fought for her, against her own people, and something inside him had shifted. For the first time, he realized that this was no longer just about survival. This was about something deeper, something he couldn't yet name. The jungle had quieted after the fight, but the silence between Max and Turna was more oppressive than ever. They walked side by side, each lost in their thoughts. The tension that had been building for days now seemed to hang in the air like a heavy fog, neither of them knowing how to bridge the gap between them. Max kept his eyes on the path ahead, trying to ignore the nagging feeling in the pit of his stomach. His body was sore from the fight, his mind still reeling from the encounter with the Thalirians. He had acted without thinking, without a plan, driven only by the need to protect Turna. But now that it was over, now that the danger had passed, he couldn't help but wonder if he had done the right thing. Turna had saved him countless times, showing him how to survive in a world that was foreign and dangerous. But she didn't need his protection. She was strong, capable, and had lived through more than Max could ever imagine. She had faced betrayal from her own people, fought to survive, and never once had she faltered. Max, on the other hand, had always been the one to rely on others, never truly tested in the way Turna had been. He had wanted to prove that he wasn't helpless, that he could stand beside her. But now, as he walked beside her, he felt more like a burden than a companion. She didn't need him. He had seen it in her eyes during the fight when she had taken down the last of the Thalirians without a second thought. She had been the one in control, not him. They arrived at the shelter by the river later that evening, and Max immediately went to work preparing the fire. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them, but he didn't know how to address it. Turna, as always, remained quiet, gathering more wood for the fire. Her movements were efficient, almost mechanical, as if the fight earlier hadn't even happened. Max tried to focus on the fire, his hands moving automatically as he built the small pile of wood into a steady blaze. The warmth from the flames spread across his body, but it did little to ease the coldness that had settled inside him. Turna sat across from him, her back straight, her eyes distant. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Max wanted to say something to break the silence, but he didn't know what to say. Everything that had happened felt like a blur, a moment of chaos, of fear, and then a return to the normal routine of survival. But it was no longer just about survival. Finally, Turna broke the silence. "You risked your life for me," she said, her voice quiet but steady. Max looked up, surprised. He had expected her to ignore the event entirely, to dismiss it as just another thing to move past, but instead she was acknowledging it. "I couldn't let them take you," Max replied, his voice just as quiet. "You're not alone in this, Turna." She met his gaze, and for the first time in days, Max saw something in her eyes that wasn't guarded, wasn't cold. There was something softer there, something almost vulnerable, but it was gone before he could make sense of it. "I know," she said simply. "But you shouldn't have fought them. You don't belong in this world." Max felt a pang of hurt at her words, but he didn't let it show. He knew what she meant. This wasn't his world. He wasn't from this planet. He wasn't trained for the dangers that lurked in the shadows, and he wasn't part of the battles that were fought in Turna's past. He was just a man trying to survive, trying to find a way back home. "I'm here now," he said, his voice more resolute than before. "I'm part of this world now, Turna. I've been here long enough to know that I'm not just a visitor. I'm with you. And I don't care if I don't belong here. I'll fight for you, even if I don't understand everything." Turna's eyes softened again, and for a moment she didn't look like the woman who had lived through so much pain and betrayal. She looked like someone who had been waiting for someone to say those words, someone who had been alone for too long. She took a deep breath, her shoulders relaxing for the first time in what felt like forever. "You're stubborn," she said with a small, almost imperceptible smile. "That's one thing I've learned about you." Max grinned, feeling a weight lift from his chest. "I'm stubborn and I'm not giving up, not on you and not on finding a way home." They sat in silence for a while longer, the crackling of the fire the only sound between them. The jungle outside was quiet now, the creatures of the night taking over the world around them. The air was still, and the only movement was the occasional flicker of the fire as the flames shifted in the wind. Max could feel the change in the air, in the way Turna was sitting now. She was still distant, still guarded, but there was something different, something that made him believe for the first time that she was starting to trust him. That maybe she was starting to accept him. It was a fragile trust, built slowly and carefully, but it was something. And in this world, something was enough. As the night wore on, they both prepared for the coming journey. They would leave the shelter at dawn, moving deeper into the jungle. They needed supplies, and Max knew that they couldn't stay in one place for too long. The jungle, while beautiful, was also full of dangers. And while Turna had proved herself capable, Max knew that they couldn't keep fighting alone. They needed allies. They needed more than just the two of them. "We need to go to the other side of the river," Turna said suddenly, breaking the silence again. "There's a safe place there, a place where we can rest for a while, but it's far, and it's dangerous." Max nodded, feeling a flicker of hope. "I'm ready for it. I'll follow you wherever you go." Turna gave him a long, searching look, as if trying to decide if he was truly ready for what lay ahead. But after a moment she nodded. "Tomorrow, then, we leave at first light." Max's heart lifted at her words. For the first time since his crash, he felt like there was a purpose to everything. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was part of something bigger, a team, a partnership, a friendship forged in the fires of survival. Turna didn't say anything else, but there was a shift in her demeanor as she finally stood up and walked toward the edge of the river, her silhouette outlined against the moonlight. Max watched her for a moment, his thoughts racing. He had come to this alien world thinking it would be just a mission, a simple exploration. But now it was clear that it had become so much more. He had found someone worth fighting for, someone who needed him as much as he needed her. And that was enough.